Yeah.
It also furnishes me with a very elegant segue, because my next poem is about a different kind of silence, but it is about silence. It's called Unanswered Prayers. And I have to say, I'm going from a poem that characterizes the entire world as dying to something that's really not anywhere near as important, except maybe to one person for a few, for a few hours or days at one point in his or her life. It's called Unanswered Prayers. And the epigraph is a French proverb. In love, there is always one who kisses and one who offers the cheek. Some friends will never be the first to call. They know I'll get in touch eventually. And I don't find it onerous at all that making the first move is up to me. Their silence doesn't indicate a lack of interest. They're genuinely glad to hear from me and often answer back. But when they don't, I'm neither hurt nor mad. A prayer may go unanswered. Still, I find a satisfaction putting into words all that I need to say. And I remind myself to trust that I've been heard. Our bond is one not prematurely broken because a longed-for word may go unspoken.
Yeah,
it's a little. No, go ahead, please.
I really liked that one. First of all, I love the way that you use the form. It's a sonnet, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Unspoken and unbroken is wonderful, wonderful, very evocative pair of words to rhyme with each other, connect with each other. But yeah, this idea of generosity of heart and generosity of spirit that is not common to all people, and the ways in which, yours also takes the form of art, takes the form of poetry, takes the form of music, and which is always a kind of a reaching out for a reader or a listener who may receive it or may not. Hopefully they do.
Right.
But I really enjoyed that, the image that it's a very deft poem. I liked the way that it was very nicely contained and very beautifully shaped.
Well, thanks. I can tell you it's actually harder to live by. And the reason I wrote it was because I was going through a period where I was writing to lots of people and I was getting nothing. And it was like, this is bugging the hell out of me. And then of course you ask, well, how do I read this silence? What does it mean? I mean, does it mean they haven't been opening their emails lately? Does it mean they read it and have decided I'm not worth a response? You can imagine all of the directions that you can let your mind go off in. And so this poem is kind of an attempt at an antidote to that, to say, sometimes it's enough just to put into your own words what it is that you need to say. And if they've heard it, great. And maybe that has to be enough. Maybe it is enough. And maybe getting a response is kind of icing on the cake. But that's hard to live by.
Yeah, I love the gentleness of the poem and the volta. It's a nice turn, but it's one of those poems. It's like I think of sometimes as wisdom poetry, and so it feels like this. This is one of those poems that I know will come in my mind at different points throughout my life, as because these moments happen to us all, in both directions, right? So it's yeah. Because I'll start thinking, oh, I should answer that email. I know I was going to do it today, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow morning. Maybe I'll do it tonight, because, and a poem like this it's very helpful in a very quiet way. By the speaker in the poem is showing being vulnerable, which I think is a wonderful thing too. When poems reveal vulnerability, sometimes they create a kind of medicine that can help us all, you know.
Wow.
You know.
Thank you. I mean, that's much more than I would have hoped for. It was kind of a medicine to myself to write the poem, but I'm glad that it has that kind of effect otherwise. And in fact, I have a lot of poems that aim to be wisdom poems. And it's really the leftover part of me that was a teacher for most of my adult life. I'm still trying to teach with poems, and I try to teach very often with song lyrics. A lot of my songs are designed to kind of stealthily teach a lesson that you might not notice when you first hear the song because you're not thinking about the lyric. But then later on, you go, well, wait a minute, he was saying something with that. And it's designed to help me with something. So yeah, thanks for your noticing that, because it is a big part of what I try to do, but it's the kind of thing that you never know if you're accomplishing, and you certainly can't tell yourself you're accomplishing. You need somebody else to tell you that it's working. So thanks.
That's a tough thing. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you, Angela.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of Emily Dickinson's poem, "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me." Sense of offering this gift out that people maybe are hearing, maybe are not, but you're going to continue to give it anyway because that's who you are, that's what you do. But I also think that everyone has been that person at least once in their lives. So it has a kind of universality to it. Everyone's had love that they've extended to someone, an offer of friendship, something that for some reason hasn't been returned and has been put in that position of trying to figure out, okay, why, and then left with trying to find some consolation, some kind of explanation for why it wasn't received. So I think the poem is lovely for that reason as well. It applies to everybody.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead, please. This reminded me of Stephanie Hines in first grade. Oh no. I remember I had the biggest crush on Stephanie, and so I wrote these long letters, 2 of them, and folded them up in an envelope, walked over to her house. Her little sister or brother or something was outside. I was too shy to give them to her, so I gave them to the sibling and then ran off or whatever, and then kind of forgot about it a little bit. But then Monday morning rolled around, I walked to school, and I was just kind of going about my day, and I looked, and there was a long light out of the girls' bathroom, and I wondered what that was about. But then I soon found out that was the line to read the letters, So,
oh no!
But I was like, so yeah, I was still mortified. So she still hasn't actually responded to me though. So that's still out there. So it was the communication went the wrong direction, So,
have you ever written that?
No, I had forgotten about it till Angela was just talking. Yeah. So.
That image of a line of girls waiting to read that's a strong image, man. Well, thank you very much for that. Round 4, Angela, what do you have for us?
Well, I am inspired by another poem, actually a memory that Brian had of Stephanie. Is that her name?
Yes.
And it reminded me that I also have such memories from school. And I also was thinking about Al's lesson poem. And so I have a poem that is part of another collection that I'm working on, which is tentatively titled "Talking to My Body Talks Back." And it's poems about embodiment and the ways in which that just goes terribly wrong to be embodied. It's very hard to be embodied. And let's face it, it's all about loss, right? Constant losses that we deal with all the time. But anyway, this is a particular memory of a kid in my grade school that I went to school with, and a particular moment I suppose we could call it loss, of recognition of things that people do to one another, and one doesn't really understand why. But anyway, so there's a series of poems, "Talking to my body talks back," and then there's usually a body part. So this is "Talking to my body talks back," left leg. It's still here, the pencil point in my left thigh, halfway down between my hip and knee. James Hedis thought it was funny. His fourth grade brain didn't know he'd become part of me forever. Since then, every time I see my leg in the bath, running by the sea, James is with me, smiling. I didn't cry. I knew somehow that was what he wanted. I didn't tell the teacher. Instead, I stayed calm until he turned away, poked and taunted the girl in front of him in line, who did cry, much to his delight. Attention was paid to a sad boy who needed it more than I. The lesson I am taught by my left thigh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever read that out loud. So,
That was
So
smooth.
what did he do exactly?
he just took a pencil and he just stabbed me in the thigh with it, and it embedded in there, and it's still there. You know, and the pencil broke off. This little,
That's what I was getting at with my question was, did the graphite tip break off in your thigh?
yeah, it stayed, and it stayed there, and you know, no one did anything about it. I'm the fourth of 5 kids. My mother, oh, you'll be fine. You know, and okay, I'm fine, but I still have this pencil point. And so I think of James Hedis every day of my life. Which of course I'm sure he doesn't know whether he's even still alive or not. And he was a very odd boy too. Of course, I mean, no one would do this who was not an odd boy, you know. And I often feel sorry for him because I think that he was intellectually not damaged, but you know, he had mental issues that now would be recognized, but at the time when I went to school, they didn't recognize such things. And he had very severe speech impediments, and I didn't. Maybe that's why I was the target of his, you know, pencil point. And it wasn't even mean. He just kind of matter-of-factly did it the way that boys tease girls in 4th grade. And that was it. But it was just striking to me to think about the ways in which people don't know, the way in which they impact and shape your body and your sense of your body through a momentary, you know, encounter that then lasts for the rest of your life. So,
wow. I mean, for as much as throughout history, people have longed to learn how to make themselves unforgettable. If only we knew we just needed a pencil.
That's right. Not to be used as a writing implement, but to be used as a weapon.
Yes. Wow.
And it's amazing to me too that the family thought, and this makes complete sense to me because it makes me think of my own family. Well, it'll work out, you know, it'll be all right, you know. But there's like a foreign object in your body. You know,
I thought was problematic, but you know, what did I know? And it's also interesting to me the way that the body like receives these insults. And a lot of these poems are about that, you know, like, so the skin grows over it and it's just like, okay, this is fine, you know, we'll absorb that and it will be part of you now. And it didn't cause any infection or anything, you know, fortunately. But you know, there are times that our bodies do that, you know. It just, and you know, all of the scars that we accumulate over time. It's a mysterious thing, the body, you know.
Well, it's funny that I'm hearing this from you, because not too long ago, one of my more recent poems, maybe 3 months ago, is about a piece of glass that I stepped on long ago that got taken up on the fleshy part of my foot that couldn't work its way out because I walk on it, and I built up a callus over it, and so it wants to come out, but it can't because it's got to go and it can't go through the tough part of my foot. And that's what the poem is about, that it's this thing that doesn't want to be where it is, but it can't come out. And I'm not sure I've heard, I mean, your poem is the first one that I've ever heard about a pencil being jabbed into someone's leg. There have been a lot of poems, and Brian, you have them yourself, if I remember correctly, about shrapnel working its way out, in or out of the body. And these are all somehow kindred, even though in the case of mine, there was no violence done to me. I just took a wrong step someplace.
I was thinking that with the pencil, that lead is, you don't even have to say it in the poem because we know we're reading it from a poet. We're hearing a poet reading it. So, you know, there's like languages inside. Like I was given a poem. Well, no, that's a story I can't really share, I suppose. You know, sometimes you get a story and it's like you want to share it, but you just break it. So I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter because like in the poem, that graphite, it's sort of like there's parts of sentences or maybe a whole idea that's in there that only the body knows, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
But it's just slightly there, but what's that? Like a lot of poets, they would have been like, make sure to say, like, open that door and say it. But that's what I love about poems, that leave space for the reader to participate, you know? And yeah.
Yeah, rather than worry it to death about like, what does this represent, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This idea of, yeah, we were talking earlier about Gregory Orr's, you know, symbol, story, and song, you know, like, so the lead point in the leg is like got lots of fascinating symbolic value, and it's not my job to point it out to the reader.
Yeah.
The reader is smart enough to.
Yeah.
You've done your job twice.
That's right.
And that's
Wow.
all that book that's coming, that you're working on now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in process. You know, I usually have, I don't know how you work, but I usually have several projects that are kind of going simultaneously.
Gotcha.
And the most recent one I finished is a series of poems that are written in response to Dante. And so I was sort of like trying to bring those to conclusion. And the body poems, they just like come on a regular basis, and I just sort of squirrel them away. And at some point I'll realize that I have enough to, you know, organize in some sort of way to put them together. But I feel like, you know, those poems are like there to come all the time, just because of, again, the nature of the project.
Yeah, there's more universality built into them than the ones about Dante, because there's an awful lot of people alive that don't know about Dante.
Exactly. Very true.
Alas. Okay, Brian, you're up.
All right. Okay, well, I'm not sure if I can segue well off that. I'm trying, but there is this idea of I was thinking about this idea of something passing by, or a gift that wasn't really meant for a specific person, but maybe received that way. Or how do we receive something from the world? You know, I guess
Okay.
Very tenuous bouncing off in terms of the comments, but there's a poem called Circumnavigating the Globe. In 1819, she held the scrimshaw carving from a whale's tooth as the Essex pulled anchor and set out from Nantucket, her lover on the foot ropes leading to the crow's nest, waving goodbye. He would never be seen alive again, something she somehow knew, her hands trembling with what love can do within us, only beginning to learn what it can do as years pass by. She said, "I love you," as the Essex disappeared from sight, and the words carried on the wind, and the earth's turning, rising and falling in a duet with the ocean's blue waters. Her words rose in thermal updrafts. They fell with the rain, wandering through long decades, the streets of Tangier, Port Moresby, Panama City, to round the Cape of Good Hope, Drake's Passage. Her own skeleton long underground, and yet her words continue on through the apple orchards, the gold sway of wheat on the prairie, fountain grass rusting into another autumn in New England, where they finally discover an old man on his deathbed, late in the 20th century, dying in a hospital where no one gives a damn, and he knows it, knowing also that he deserves nothing more. And yet these words, he hears them in the breeze at the window, the curtains lifting and falling as they near, and they pass right by him. A sweet thing that, even if they were never meant for him, here they are, called out over the sea, one voice of the eternal, love, even as it escapes us, even as we set sail with the sidelights on, red to port, green to starboard, never to return.
Oh, that's chewy. The imagery is, I mean, that's chewy. It's got a great tactile quality in the mouth, in the words, to hear them, the images. It isn't just how evocative they are for what they are, but how they sound. This is really a masterful in a musical sense. And then it's such a romantic concept. I can remember reading long ago that if you, and the purpose of this was to demonstrate how small atoms are. And it said that if you counted the number of atoms that you breathe into your lungs with one breath, and then you multiply it over the course of a lifetime, and you consider that atoms are not destroyed, every time you or I take a breath, it's something like we breathe in 20,000 atoms that were once breathed in by Leonardo da Vinci. And so that's what this reminded me of, the idea that the expression "I love you" goes out, to the stars, but also circulates around the globe, and that somehow it has a presence over time. It's such a hopeful and romantic concept, very much in counterpoint to the world is dying and it's Tuesday.
Gotta have some harmony. You gotta have some balance, So.
Well, I love you. The proclamation also showed up in the Alexa poem, right?
Yeah.
This is lovely to return in this very different way. Yeah, and it is a very evocative poem. I also have along with my obsession with Dante, I also have an obsession with Melville. And so when I was about the Essex, and it's like, oh my God, this is my stuff. I love this stuff. So that very evocative, setting us back into that time, which it shouldn't be nostalgia because I never lived it, but I have imaginatively lived it many times. And so I find it very compelling.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wish I could have linked it to your poem more as we're doing the linkage, with the.
Well, it's not because I'm sliding in poems that I had no intention of reading.
Yeah, that's not. It's great. It's great when you can do it, but it's not a requirement by any means. My question to you, Brian, would be, how did you arrive at this at the specifics of the opening of the poem? Because you could, after all, have opened it any time in history, any place on the globe. How did you come to choose this? It's hard for me to put me back in the headspace of the time when I thought that right then, because this is an older poem. It's from a while back, and it was sort of like it wasn't housed in any book along the way. So it's now going to be in a book that comes out this next year. And I enjoy reading it. So I've read it in front of people and places, and it just sort of one of those poems that just was on its own, sort of like that ship, like the words just sort of drifting around, doing its thing. Yeah.
Didn't have like one place to be, so. But I don't fully remember exactly what, although I do remember thinking I was doing it, trying to chart back, like if someone's 100 years now or 110 roughly, what that's 1910, in the 1900, if they had parents, if they had, you know, and I was trying to go back a certain distance to see who was still alive right around the time when I was writing this, if they could be alive, and if they might have been born at a time that might have been just in earshot of this period, you know, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I think I was probably researching to see when certain things happened, you know, and then found the Essex and that kind of, that I'm guessing that that's how I got to that. I hadn't really thought about the genesis of that particular part of the poem in a long time, but I really like researching with poems and learning about the world, finding out things, and just going down passages where, you know, you start out at like I remember writing about my grandfather once, and it was memoir, so it was you know, prose, and it's, you know, fact. I know it's so crucial there, but the problem is, how do I talk about my grandfather, who I knew so well? When I was like 6 or 7, I remember standing in his kitchen, and he had been a Marine in World War II. And I knew the stories, not from him, but from other people in the family that I'd sort of heard from a distance about how he had killed a Japanese officer with a machete, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm standing as a child in his kitchen, and he brings up to me that machete. And
Oh.
he hands it out to me, and he doesn't tell me anything about it. And I just hold it in my hands. There was a very quiet moment, and then he took it and then walked away and put it wherever it went. And it just like, what, you know, and then when I was older and I'd come back from combat, he was still alive, but those stories, I didn't want to ask him about those because he was getting pills to help him sleep because of the war. You know?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to like further that, you know, but I needed to write about it because part of the reason, right? Well, you know, as we do as writers, right? There's this thing we have to write about and understand. So I ended up researching. I remember I found a bougainville monarch that took me about 6 hours to find that one insect, and then it ends up in one line, you know? So that it's a long-winded way of saying I love researching for poems and finding and just going down those passageways and discovering and then sharing that in the poem too, you know?
Well, it pays off in this particular poem because you really evoke a very strong sense of the reality of that time period and you know, the personalities of the people and that moment when, you know, the ship disappears. So, I mean, keep doing what you're doing, you know?
Well, I hope those who listen to this conversation, that they might have this experience too. This particular poem was translated when I was in Dubai for a poetry festival, and they translated it into Arabic, and I got to see people listening in another language to this poem and their response to it. And it was really, oh no, not Dubai, I'm sorry, it was in Jordan. I was in Jordan. But it was amazing to see the audience and someone coming up afterwards telling me how much they love the poem. But it was in another, it'd been carried over into, so these words were then not just carried around the earth, but then carried into another language. And then,
wow,
you know, so it's very cool. So
that's a great experience. Wow.
Yeah. So, and I think part of that process is just getting out in the world and also just sharing your poems with poets around the globe. And if you're not careful, they'll start translating your stuff real quickly for you. You know, it's a good thing. So
I'll take your word for it. Well, I'm going to go. I'm going to go now because I'm really enjoying this. But we still have 2 more poems each, or maybe.
I think 1, right?
You have 1. I have. So this is my next to last. Yeah. This is a very old poem of mine. I think I probably wrote it 40 years ago, but it goes back to a time much, much further than that, when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And it describes, it was a poem that at the beginning is about fear, but at the end is about something different. It's called A Kind of Triumph. Bullet-riddled, propped erect, with sticks supporting arms which reached unnaturally, its features shattered beyond all naming, too black and shaggy to be any snowman, abominable enough to flood my face with fear at a mere glimpse and wring my kid's spine in a hot, stiffening grip. It blasted at me from a right-hand page of Popular Science, my boyhood choice. It scared me more than any image had. It put me in a panic. I would drop the issue from my hands as though it burned and stand wholly dismayed, utterly still, until the tide subsided and I breathed more easily again. That stab of fear was hateful. Yet, I secreted the issue beneath some books piled on my nightstand shelf, and every day for weeks, I made believe I didn't know the article was there, the August issue, 2/3 of the way. I'd turn the pages absently and feign partial attention, but deliberately, my fingers neatly covering the corners, obscuring the page numbers as they summoned doom. The ruse kept working. Every day, the same hot flash that made me look away, but not before I'd seen it all again. That exercise from 50 years ago, what was it? Death? Did it prepare me to look on the dead? Surely not that alone. For once life is bleached out, remaining forms don't seize me by themselves. They never did. Disfigurement, then. Now we're getting warm. That figure, violated, mutilated, was once animated. Unfamiliar though its flesh, its form in splendor fit its spirit. Smudged by bullets, imprecise, a forced distortion of itself, it gave the lie to nature in the photograph. And so, disfigurement. I still recoil at the torn forms of the formerly alive. And yet, I think if I should turn the page to gaze on it today, some other bells would ring out in me. First, the landscape in the background of the photo, snowy, sparse, a few trees offering poor cover, food so hard to find, the desperate treks grown ever longer, solitude become a spectacle for hunters. Second, they themselves, a grinning band, their rifles slung at hips and shoulders, in their eyes the light of questions answered, shown once and for all. This extraordinary thing, so rare it moved like truth between real and imagined, concluded in an image on a page. By killing it, they proved this creature lived. Their reputations made, their smiles confirm they could continue in a kind of triumph. More than the sight of what they ended, now I fear the sight of what they kept alive.
Wow, that's a phenomenal poem. Yeah, I love the different turns it takes. At the first, we're in a world and we have this, we go into the past, and we see it, and then there's a shift to this examination, and then there's another shift, and then there's that almost like a volta at the end, like that bright turn, that with the surprise, to me, I'm not sure, like, it's one of those ones, it's a poem that I'll just keep going back into, but when you said fear, and maybe, but there's something different at the end, maybe it felt like it was a different kind of fear at the end, or recognition at the end,
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just so terrible. Like it's so interesting that how the child sees the terrible, but then the adult sees the something that was quietly much more terrible,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting it. That's exactly what it's about. It's about scaring yourself as a kid and then growing into being scared by the not what you see, but the meaning of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that lonely trek of the bear, when that alone is almost its own poem of seeing it going across and the tracks and the hunger of it, or the animal, I should say. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. The photograph in question was supposed to be Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
And
Right.
but these hunters had blasted it to beyond recognition. So you couldn't really see what it was. It was so disfigured, you couldn't identify it, but you knew that something had been alive that was not like anything else, and now was no longer alive. And that was the whole thing. And I never really picked up on the expression on the faces of the hunters until I got older and had gone through the process of empathizing with the creature that was killed. And that's, as you say, that's where the whole idea that this thing is alone in an environment that's increasingly hostile, that doesn't want to promote its staying alive, and is finally, ended. Its life is finally ended, but it struggled for a long time towards its end before that happened. So now I remember the look on the faces of those hunters, and I'm revolted by that. When I was a kid, I was revolted by the bullet-riddled face of this creature.
But now there's something, it seems like as the poem goes, by what I experienced with the speaker, there's a kind of beauty and I'm not sure if beauty is the right word, but there was something really revered or admired in that animal, that creature,
I think it's awe. I think the word is awe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I probably couldn't have said that certainly when it happened or when I wrote the poem, but I can kind of see it now. I'm sorry, Angela, you were going to say something.
No, I'm just listening and thinking about the ways in which this links up in interesting ways with conversations that I've been having recently about the fascination for the grotesque in certain writers, people like Flannery O'Connor, also Martin McDonagh's new film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a wonderful film, The Banshees of Inisherin, and is very typical of McDonagh. Some really horrific bloody stuff happens, some violence happens, and it's fascinating. And even though I took a bunch of my students to see the premiere, they're horrified by it, but it's also, you can't look away. There's a fascination that we have for the grotesque, which is a kind of darkness that we carry within us. And it also reminds me of my own children. There was one particular book that we had, they used to refer to it as the heavy book, because it was heavy. It was an old book, and it had some Edgar Allan Poe's tales in them, and there were some very graphic illustrations. And particularly my middle son, who always has had a penchant for darkness, he could not pick up that book without going to the page where there was a body that was decomposing in its bed, and look at it and then like freak himself out and scream about it. And then I'd hide the heavy book, but he would find the heavy book and he would look for this page. And I used to think, like, what is it in this child that wants to see this image that he knows freaks him out entirely? So your description was just so apt of like pretending it's not there, and then casually leafing through it and then finding it, but knowing the whole time that that's really what you're looking for. It just is so, it's not only true of children, it's also true of all of us, because we have this fascination for darkness.
Well, thank you for telling me about your son, because I feel a little less like a freak now.
It's very normal. Yeah, he did that. He also did that. Sorry, I'm going to mention Dante again. We had Blake's illustrated Dante, and I didn't know he was looking at these images, which are pretty horrific as a small child. This is the danger of having a lot of books in your house that you don't want your kids necessarily to look at. But he did the same thing. Like, he didn't want to see them, but like he couldn't stop looking at them. He's a philosopher now, so she's recovered somewhat, I guess. But it is fascinating, I think, the way that we have this relationship with the grotesque, and it does teach us something. And I think the best writers, or a lot of the very best writers, use it because it really does get our attention and enables us to see like nothing else can, these truths, the essential truths that we're trying to get at, that we get at from different angles, depending on when it is that we look at it,
Wow, I guess so. Wow, I don't think I've read this poem. I've never read it at a public reading. And so I probably have never read it to other people out loud. It's in my first book. But so thank you for those responses, because if you're the kid in this, you think, I look back on that and I say, what was wrong with me? But I guess it's the same thing that's wrong with everybody, so I feel better about that.
Yeah, we're all a mess.
That's a good poem to read in front of people, though. That read really well.
Yeah.
So people would enjoy that. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's an old poem, and the reason I never read it is that I didn't publish my first book until I was over 60. And so it was a very old poem at the time. And so you know how it is, you tend to read your newest stuff. So, but okay, very good. Let's turn the corner and head for home here and go to the last round with Angela leading us off, please.
Will do. Yeah, I'm thinking about the theme that you introduced, which is just so rich and so full of possibilities. I felt like I would be remiss not to read some poem about the pandemic, because we've just spent 2.5 years, I guess, almost 3 years, living through this experience, universal experience. First time for most of us, have not been in a pandemic before, and so much loss, so much absence, so much suffering, so much of a sense of our sense of certainty, our sense of safety, our health, our freedom, all of those things just overnight were stripped away from us. So I actually wrote a book of poems about this called The Love in the Time of Coronavirus, a Pandemic Pilgrimage, because I made myself write a poem every day, even though I could not focus on anything because I was just like, and also I live in New York City. So we were, we were the epicenter of everything, and day after day, it just sounded like things were getting worse and worse, and all you could do was watch the news and stay inside and hope that you didn't get it, So in many ways, this is sort of it's interesting to look back on these poems because it's like a time capsule, because they try to capture from the very beginning. The first poem takes place March 22nd, 2020, and the last one is March 22nd, 2021. So it's a year basically in which it tries to remind us of the experience. So, because I knew I would forget these things, actually. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write the poems. So anyway, I thought I would read one of the poems, which is really about the ways in which we dealt with the kinds of absences that we had to face. And this poem, these are all sonnets, by the way, because I'm obsessed with sonnets. And this poem is called Our Emmaus. I started with a Jesus poem. I'm going to end with a Jesus poem. Might remember from the readings that take place around Easter time, that after Christ dies and is resurrected, there's a story where he is on the road. There are two or three disciples that are on the road, and they're talking about everything that has happened. There's a strange guy that shows up, and he says, "Tell me what happened." And they're talking to him, and they say, "I can't believe you didn't hear about this guy." And then they get where they're going in Emmaus, and they sit down to break bread. And in the breaking of the bread, they realize that the stranger is Christ. He was there the whole time. So this poem was written actually liturgically during Easter time, and it's called Our Emmaus. And the epigraph comes from the Gospel of Luke, where he says, "And the two recounted what had taken place on the way, and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. You hand me the loaf, I tear off the heel, dip it in the blue dish of olive oil. This ritual performed at every meal gladdens my heart. This is the real presence of joy these days of pandemic. The world's gone insane. People are frantic. They talk of the news, the news, the news, terrible deaths, bleak crucifixions, lives once lived well ordered, now lack direction. Better to sit here, just me and you, to set on our table olives and wine, to savor the taste of sweet grapes and brine, to raise our glasses and toast the poor dead, to mend the world and to break our bread. And so it seems like in the little rituals that we created, and everybody created different rituals. Some people made bread, some people learned the piano, but these were the ways in which we learned to deal with absence and loss during the pandemic, and some of us are still practicing those.
Well, that goes back to the Frost quote that you gave us earlier about what was it? Make little forms.
Yeah, when you're in the midst of disaster, catastrophe, or grief, make little forms. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, the poet Jean Debroux. I remember I was doing a reading with her one time, and the audience asked her a question about why she writes in formal verse, and she uses these set forms. And she said it helped her to be able to take this complicated, I'm just paraphrasing her, she said it much more eloquently, but the difficulties of her life and the things she was struggling with, it helped her to sort of separate it from her so she could sort of process it in this box, this thing, this, I would maybe call it like a vehicle or a space, but a poem, and so yeah, I wonder if do you get that, the writing of that book help in that way somehow to sort of be able to see it in a form, or how did it feel writing those poems?
Yeah, absolutely. It did feel as though, again, I could exercise control over what was going on the page, and I had no control over the chaos that was going on all around us. Yeah. And that gave me each day some sense of, okay, this may be a crappy day in all kinds of ways, but at least I've made some sort of mark. Another way it's another form of the poetry of witness. I've borne witness to this moment, to this day, yep, to the disasters that are befalling us at this particular time. So I felt like I was creating something in the midst of all of this chaos and destruction, which was comforting. I also, one of the reasons I like the sonnet so much is because I think it's perfectly suited to pilgrimage, whether the pilgrimage is actually a physical one, like the Holy Land book describes, or a spiritual and emotional and intellectual one that we're all making during the pandemic. I think the subtitle "Pandemic Pilgrimage" is so expressive of where we were. Like, we didn't go anywhere, but yet we were all on this journey together and alone. And I love the fact that the sonnet has 14 lines, because, again, helpless Catholic that I am, I know that the Stations of the Cross have exactly 14 stations. And so each line of the sonnet is like one station along the road, and it's the Via Crucis, of course, that everybody's walking. So there's this sense of moving. You move through a little pilgrimage in each poem, and then each poem is a station along the journey that you're making. So I always feel as though that there's something in the structure of the poem and at the structure of the book that suggests a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, providential design, that there's a beauty in this that we may not see, but it is there, and that, again, poems are kind of an act of faith that they are, and attesting to the fact that it's there.
Just in practical terms, Brian, I would say about working in form is it because you submit to the requirements of a form, and what that does is it simplifies your decision making when you're wrestling with something you're trying to express. Because if you're going to continue to, if you're going to follow the form, there are only certain ways that you can try to say what you're trying to say. Whereas if you're working in free verse, there are innumerable ways that you can try to say what you're trying to say. And so it does a lot of the pre-editing for you and puts you in a position where you might only have a few choices that you then are making among some clear options, and you don't get swallowed up in all the possibilities. So it's a continual tug of war between going back to exactly what you're trying to say and saying it in the way that the form is letting you say it and preventing you from saying it in a different way. So it's when you get used to working in form, you thrive on that tug of war. Is that a fair thing to say, Angela?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add to that very often it takes you in directions you did not expect to go.
Yeah, because you get pushed.
Requirement of meter and rhyme, and it's like, oh, I never would have thought to say that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like where I need to go. So yeah, so there is this. You turn, to a certain extent, you turn over control to letting the form lead you where it needs to go.
Yeah,
I would agree, except I have one quibble with it, which I actually don't. I don't think the form. I mean, I agree with the struggles and the way you both describe that, but I see them all as forms, and free verse is a form too. The tricky part is I think of it like flying in a plane over the middle of America, and you look out the window and you see those giant rectangles, you know, and it's kind of like a sonnet or maybe a villanelle or something, you know, because they got to put the plow in the stick, right, from the Greek. So they're going to make a verse, and they know they got 12 syllables or whatever it might be, and boom, there's a road there. So they got to pick up the thing, and it's intentional because the road, that's the way it's all set up. This idea will only flower here if you do it, if you use the land properly, right? But then like free verse is like flying over Oregon or Idaho or something, and you look down and they got that crazy weird plot of land with forest around it, and you have to, and it's true, you don't kind of know. It's like it's foggy that day, and you're not sure how far you're supposed to go with the plow. You might hit a tree, you know, or you might go past into ground that isn't really suitable for planting that kind of crop or that idea, you know?
yeah.
It's tricky that way. So that's where I agree, but I still think both of them are forms, and they're both organic. So we take the organic metaphor all the way to its, you know, a conclusion that leads me to that, you know what I mean? And I really love the Greeks with the stick and the stickic integrity and what the line's doing. And it's something, going back though a little bit, you know, Angela, when you were talking about this form is so beautiful, because I was thinking of the architecture of the stanza, you know, the stanza's rooms in the Italian, right? And how we're creating these sort of habitable spaces, and stanza by stanza, room by room, we're augmenting the imagination. You know, it's a beautiful thing. So I love forms too. You probably won't see many in the books I've written, though there's some that I've written that they're definite forms, and I know what they are, but I've modified them and I've tried to hide them. And I know some people might see them, but maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know, you know. So, but it's should I jump into a poem? I know we're doing the round here, so.
Yeah. Well, this will be your last one if you want. Go ahead.
Well, we could go till dawn. I'm good. I'm enjoying this conversation. Okay, there's a, you know, Angela, your poem made me think of this too, so it works out nice, I think, in some ways. This idea of well, I'll just read the poem. I think we'll be able to see it. It's instant replay. The ruling on the field has been challenged, and now the crew in New York studies the moment in slow-mo, nearly frame by frame. The bang bang play, a difference of milliseconds, camera angles, a decision on when the ball enters the glove. History will be surprised by its own error should the call be reversed, the runner staying on the bag or dusting himself off as he walks on back to the dugout. It's all about timing, the perception of bodies in motion, everything unfolding from this. And as I watch the game and wait for the call from New York, I think of the two of us curled up lazy in a Saturday afternoon bed, your head on my chest, our conversations about the multiverse, the many variations of us out there, the things we do, the things we see. But now that you're gone, it's become so clear that the difference between two versions of the same moment is you. Though I keep trying, frame by frame, to slow this gathering of years, to reverse them into a stillness that might return us to one another. The clouds forming above, then reforming. The departed returning to this life on their deathbeds with their loved ones there to greet them, as I am for you. The word after transposed into the word now. The word love made sweeter in its return. The word death transformed, finally, into a gift.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. This idea of trying, this, I was trying, well, I think the poem speaks for itself. I don't have to, I hope. Yeah. Yeah, her name is Elise. And Elise Kuznets. What a beautiful poet. The husband's going to say that, sure. But the other side of me, the writer side, she was cracking. I mean, she was a phenomenal poet. Yeah. So, yeah. And her books are out there. Small Hours was her first book. And then Angel Bones was a posthumous book. Small Hours was with Truman State, but sadly they folded. But thankfully, Alice James Books, which published her second book, they also have brought in and house her first book now too. So
That's nice.
yeah. So
Beautiful poem, very, very powerful. And the last line, of course, a killer last line.
Well, it moves towards transcendence, doesn't it? Yeah. I like that it starts with
Everybody's frozen
this.
up. Okay,
oh,
now
okay.
you're back. Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. It didn't do that. It didn't do that for me, so I think we're okay.
Okay.
Anyway, I like that it starts with this very familiar baseball image of waiting for the call from New York. I mean, it's never used to be a thing, but it's been a thing for a while now. And everybody's come to understand that you have the time to meditate on the branching paths in the multiverse, that somehow both calls are equally possible when you're waiting for the definitive call. And of course, in the multiverse, as theoretical physicists posit it, everything is equally real all the time, all the possibilities. So there is always a place where this or that hasn't happened, or these things that are gone come back. So it's I wonder what you said about the multiverse in those late night conversations.
Yeah, she loved sci-fi, and it was also, it's part of the conversation of like, who are we and how does this whole thing work, and what is God and what is death and what is life, and all the big questions are, but then mixed in with those things is like, yeah, and others, you love Cheetos, or I don't like mint ice cream, or it's like the mixture of the sacred and the mundane, and all the good stuff of life, yeah.
Well, this is a great poem for you to end on because of the way it ends. It's just so, I mean, you touched on it.
Consolation, right?
Yeah.
That's right. As a gift, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all I was going to say.
Oh, sorry, we're all jumping in here, and I should just be quiet. But I was just gonna say, I was very fortunate. I wouldn't have written this poem. This was also kind of an assignment, but not exactly. And what I mean by that is, there's a thing to Fresno. My alma mater from my undergraduate was at Fresno State, and I was asked to do a thing that just finished now too. Every October, they've been doing a thing called the Fresno 15, and they challenge 3 poets to write. To share poems every day for like 15 days over the course of October. And it's to raise money for a scholarship fund for students there in their MFA program, in the writing program. And so I decided to do a challenge similar to the one that you talked about, Angela, you did on much grander scale over a year and a much more important scale. But I thought for a while this project, I'll write baseball poems every day for the 15 days, but I'll do them that day and publish it that day. Like, it's going to be rough, but here we go. You know what I mean? So this is one of those poems, you know.
Oh, terrific.
Wow.
What a wonderful, yeah, that's a wonderful assignment and a wonderful source of, you know, stuff that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, you know. I love it.
Yeah. So it's a different, and just as you said that, I realized that's a different kind of form, you know. If you put time as a constraint, sometimes it pushes you into ideas you wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Wonder, you know?
Yeah, it's a different, exactly. It's a different kind of limitation. But I mean, that's where we get the limitations inspire us. So you got this in one day then. Did you rework it later, or is this what you got?
No, this is it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Great for
Because
yeah, it was a
doesn't
gift.
always happen that way.
Yeah.
that's terrific. It's a great story about the inception of the poem, you know, how it came to be. Thanks for giving that as a background to it, because it puts it gives a context to it. Especially because if you did it all at once, you know, in one day, and it makes this great change from the beginning. I mean, it's a baseball poem at the beginning, but it's something more at the end. You know.
Yeah, a friend of mine told me, he said, you know, Brian, I like these poems you're doing, but like, I kind of feel like if I'm a baseball fan, I don't get enough baseball. Then I'm like, so it's like, you know, a little more baseball, baby. So,
well, for as much
less death, please.
yeah.
People have been claiming that baseball is universal for so long. Maybe they ought to just live by their words.
Well, I live also like that, and also Angela, what you said earlier about baseball, something about, you had the great line about baseball. The whole point of baseball is coming home, you know.
Yeah.
Home, you know, baseball started it, but home for me is her. So you know,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's a great game. So many symbols. It's so symbolic of so much about human life. You know, it's
Yeah, well, also the great truth about it is that if you don't understand it, looking at it is really dull. But if you do understand it, looking at it is endlessly fascinating. And the thing that you're looking at next to the person sitting next to you that doesn't know what's going on and is bored, you're both looking at exactly the same visuals. But to be able to see into what you're looking at is what makes the difference. And baseball has that dimensional potential more than almost anything. I mean, it does it. Certainly great painters do that with their canvases, and you can go into them and keep going into them. But boy, baseball is a great model for that kind of reality. And I wish more people understood it, because the demise of the game is all really just a reflection of how unimaginative people are getting.
So hopefully maybe at some point, if we get lucky, we could all three be in Music and we could go to
Oh God.
That'd be fun.
Get lucky.
That'd be so good.
What's the
because you know there's great Italian food there. If there's nothing else, there is great Italian food in Music. Yeah.
What level is the affiliate in Music?
I can't
AAA?
AAA, I think AAA or single A. It's changed over the years. So when we used to go, it was the Wilkes-Barre Barons, and they were a team that was, you know, a Yankees team, farm team.
I remember the name.
Yeah, but I'm not sure who's there now, and you know whether they're the same level. But yeah,
right.
This is where I feel guilty, because I'm a Yankees fan, but the only ball club I've seen up in that area was over in Maine, actually, pretty far away. And I saw Red Dogs. I mean, Sea Dogs. I think it's Mud Dogs or something. It was a
Sea Dogs. Portland Sea Dogs.
it was a fun game. It was fun to go, but I felt like I was like trying to sneak in as a Yankees fan, sneak out, but it was a lot of fun. So.
Well, I'm a lifelong Red Sox fan, and I can, you have my blessing. It's okay. But we had a AAA team in Pawtucket, which is right across the line from where I live until a couple of years ago. And I used to go see AAA ball all the time. But then they goofed up and let the team go to Worcester, and now I don't get to see it anymore. Yeah. So anyway, that's our musings on baseball. I'm going to end the proceedings here with my final poem. It's called "All Goodbyes Ain't Gone," which is a reference to a blues lyric. All shut eyes ain't sleep, and all goodbyes ain't gone. And it's in a memoriam to Robert Hamilton, American painter. And Robert Hamilton was the father of Scott Hamilton, who's a great, great jazz tenor player, world citizen, and one of my closest friends. And so this poem takes place in the house, in the Hamilton household, which was in Providence. And I used to spend a lot of time there about 50 years ago. All goodbyes ain't gone. Oh, and by the way, it's about creation and destruction and what you lose and why you lose it. When he was teaching, he would go to Maine to paint each summer. As the season ended, he would keep new work he liked and throw away the rest. Until one afternoon, he found a piece, unsigned but claimed as his, for sale in a small Portland shop. The man who brought it in, when found and questioned, readily admitted it. He got it at the dump. It had been thrown out, after all. He'd done nothing wrong. He begged a signature, in fact, to boost the price. That episode began the yearly end of summer bonfires. The work, which didn't measure up, was given over to the flames, a ritual that purified the efforts of the season. The artist would return to work, refreshed. One winter afternoon, while he was off at school, his son and I, with time to kill, nosing about the house, the better to amuse ourselves, dislodged a box of color slides from off a hallway shelf. When held up to the light, each one revealed a painting in the father's recent style. He makes reference slides of all his work, his son said, looking carefully. Don't think I recognize this batch, although he's used foam core for the last couple of years. Let's ask him. He'll be back right after class. On his return, we showed him what we'd found. He took the slides out from their plastic wells and scrutinized each one. Not a detail escaped him. Finally, he put them back. I thought I took care of these, he said acidly, and brought them with a can of lighter fluid out to the backyard. He put a match to them and watched them burn. So these are paintings he had to kill twice.
Yeah, another version of killing your darlings, or maybe you're not so much. So the inspiration for that poem came from a true story, finding this?
Oh yeah, this is exactly what happened. And it was interesting to me because we looked at those slides and I thought the work was great, but he didn't want to, I mean, he had already burned them. And then when he discovered that they weren't gone, he burned them again. So it just reminded me that, we are, if we're careful, we are the final arbiters of our work. Now, having said that, maybe it's easier for you to control your output if you're a painter and you can burn what you do. But how many writers have died only to have something they hated discovered and printed after their death?
Yeah.
So beware. Not everything you lose is lost forever.
That should be the second epigraph of the poem.
Yeah.
There's some things you might like to lose, and you just can't. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't just mean the last 10 pounds.
Yeah, I could lose that twice over. That'd be okay.
Well, this has been so delightful. It's gone for a really long time. I'm probably going to have to cut it into 2 parts and show it over.
Right. I did not realize how late it was.
Over 2 months, but that's fine. I've done it before. I'll do it again, and I'll do it happily because it's been a great conversation. You two had not met before we did this, but you sure work great together as guests, and I thank you for that. And we found a lot of things to talk about in common, and I thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting us. This is such a treat, and to get to meet Brian. I'm blessed to already know you, Al, but to get to meet Brian and have this, very congenial conversation, and now to know about your work. I can't wait to go out and find your work.
Yeah, there are discoveries too, which is great. And Brian, do you remember what I said to you when I met you? At the time, you were touring behind Here Bullet.
Yeah, but it was. No, I don't remember what you said. I might when you say it though. So.
Well, I said to you at the time, because of course this is about a little over 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I said to you, Here Bullet is so powerful, and you're getting known for your war poetry. I hope that you're able to make the shift into writing about different things and be accepted for having made a shift and for allowing your life after Here Bullet to be as potent a source for you as an extraordinary circumstance was for you. I mean, to have written Here Bullet, you had to have lived what you lived. So it was very easy. It would have been very easy to say, well, that's what this guy is all about. But it's not what you're all about. And it's nice to see that you've been able to turn what followed in your life into as fertile a field for what you do as that extraordinary opportunity was.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's been a long road on that kind of term. And I think this next year I have 3 books coming out in a row, right? So
wow.
Yes, it's going to be,
That's great.
it'll be August, September, and October, and it'll be a box set for the holidays or something. But so they couldn't do it a box set completely, but they did it, back to back. And then each one of them comes with an album of music.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's just like a whole bunch of stuff. So it's I think I hope you'll enjoy it. Let me know what you think and stuff. But I think and then there's one other thing that's kind of a secret right now. I think I'll leave it a secret, but it's a third part of the art. So there's poetry, there's music, and then there's another thing with each book that's a 3-part thing. So yeah.
Excellent.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Well,
so it just may be a ferret and too much caffeine. It just, but I can't wait for a baseball game. We can talk shop around and watch some baseball and talk about.
If we can figure out a way to make that happen, I'd be all for it. I think that would be great.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed it. This was delightful.
Yeah, I agree. And once again, thank you very, very much. And we got everything we wanted to get out of it, and some other people will get a chance to eavesdrop on it too. So I'm happy very much all around. So once again, thanks. And I'm gonna bring a conclusion to the revels.
Okay.
Farewell.
All right. Thank you. Ciao.
Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.